Ahoy, hoy, everyone! Hello and welcome. My name is Martin. I'm from the team at Reedsy, and I'd like to welcome you to this Reedsy Live, our ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. I'm very glad that you could join us today. I have lost a little window, and that tells me what people's chats are. But while I find that, please let me know where you're coming from today. Always glad to see folks and find out where they're joining from. Is it main chat, interview, camera, comments and reactions? There we go. Got this stuff all loaded up. If this is your first time, thank you for joining us. We're going to start the show proper in just a few minutes and have our guests who's going to come in and talk to us about how to write cinematically. How to write for cinema, maybe. Well, more how to apply the skill set in cinematic storytelling to one's book, no matter what medium. We have Paul Fraser, C.R. Chapman, Joe Freitag out from our Reedsy learning ones. Good to see you joining for all of these, Joe. Nice and early. With all these events we're running, you're barely getting a chance to lie in. Mark Lund from Worcester, Mass. Elise, we have Kaylin from South Carolina. Brian from the UK. Whereabouts in the UK? I myself, regular viewers will know, I'm based in Scotland, in the country's capital, Edinburgh. The Horror Comedy Hangout in Orlando. August Institution has joined us. Lisa Waite from Central Alberta, Canada. Diane from Chicago. Good to see so many people joining today. Before we bring on a guest, please do consider giving this live stream a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. It really helps me. I think my performance reviews coming around and being able to show some likes probably won't hurt. We have Claire Barry from Dundee in Scotland, Ted from Annapolis, Maryland, Catherine from Devon here in the UK. Glad you can all join us from all over. Athena from Norwich, Dan Field from California's Central Coast. Oh gosh, is it? I guess you're sort of in the middle between North and South California, but I'm imagining some sort of sea or some sort of inland sea in the middle of California, for which you are just on the border of. Efren from Los Angeles, California. Good to see you again. Marsha from Denver, Colorado. And Vanessa from Rijeka, Croatia. Glad to see folks from everywhere being represented here. Anyway, we have reached the top of the hour, so I'm going to start the show and get things going. Thank you, everyone. Let's go. Welcome to Reedsy Live. Hello everyone and welcome once more to Reedsy Live, Reedsy's ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. My name is Martin from the team at Reedsy, and I'd like to welcome you, whether you're watching live or watching on replay, to this very special writing webinar. We've got a lot to get through, so I'm glad to see everyone has already joined, settled in, drawn themselves a lovely cup of tea or time appropriate beverage as we get this thing going. So let me bring on my guest for today, who is a writer, an art history professor who's taught courses at Yale and the Smithsonian and other institutions. He is a broadcaster who's presented programs with the BBC and other platforms. He is the Pulitzer-nominated writer of over 30 books. His latest publication, the last I checked, was the 12-Hour Author, everything you need to know to get published and become a successful author. He's an editor and ghostwriter who is available on Reedsy. Please welcome Dr. Noah Charney. Noah, how you doing?
Martin, thank you so much. I love that you said time-appropriate beverages because I'm coming to you all from Slovenia, where it's 9 o'clock at night, and you're very kind to let me give a talk relatively early. When I give talks for the Smithsonian, they make me start at midnight my time and go till 2 a.m. So at this point, a time-appropriate beverage could be Slovenian schnapps. I know we have one person from Rijeka, Croatia, who's going to probably have a rakia in front of her, but whatever you have, it's more than welcome. Thank you so much for hosting me. This is my second Reedsy Live talk. I did one on book proposals in the spring, and today I'm talking about cinematic writing techniques. And this is something that's applicable no matter what genre you write in, from fiction to nonfiction, even article writing. The basic concept is how we can take advantage of the way that humans have started to read anything that is not purely theoretical. And this is an advance that a lot of people haven't thought about. And I hope to sort of explode your concept of what writing can be with relation to how we read things in a way that perhaps you haven't thought of before. So, the main focus here is how we can most easily facilitate the translation from the written word in a book to a sort of film version of what we're reading about that we create in our minds. And humans started to do this really in the 1950s, in the screen era. It was a time when we were initially immersed in screen based entertainments, but it was a slow process. And it was only really in the 1990s, moving on forward, that we constantly have screens with moving images in front of our eyes. It's hard when we talk about the influence of some historical works of art in old periods, because I'm a professor of art history. This is what I'm usually teaching about. And it's hard for us to wrap our heads around the concept that there was a time when humans would have almost never seen an image that was not in real life. They might have seen mirror reflections, but mirrors were very expensive in the Middle Ages. And then they go to a church, perhaps, and they see all of these amazing paintings, and they may have never before encountered an image. Now, today we're super saturated with this tsunami of information, of images, and of moving images. And we've become so used to it that we've integrated it into the way we think. And so when we hear a story, we have this tendency, and you can catch yourself doing it as well, to translate what we're hearing into this little film that we imagine in our minds. And we do the same thing with writing. There was a period, of course, before the screen era where people didn't tend to do this, where they would sit with the ideas, the words. They would be very happy for a novel to go on as long as possible, particularly serialized works of fiction in English in the 19th century by people like Dickens and Thackeray. And they would get paid by the word, and they would say, "Oh, well, let's have this keep going as long as possible," because there weren't rival entertainments sort of tugging at our collars. And so you could settle in to a story that you would not try to make into a film. You might imagine what was happening as if it were happening in real life before you. But the idea of cinematizing it, which isn't a real word, we just made it up, but I think that's okay, is something that is real now. And I've had editors tell me, "Noah, can you write this scene from a different angle?" Now, that's using a cinematographic term. So we talk about camera angles or positioning of the camera with relation to characters. And that's what I want to talk about today. These are, of course, just some tools that you can use or not. Hopefully, they will be helpful to you, but you always have to pick and choose what sort of advice is going to resonate. And if this is helpful, then I'm really grateful. So, perfect. We're moving on to the second slide. As Martin mentioned, I do have a book called The 12-Hour Author that came out now with Bloomsbury, which has lots of details about the sort of things we're talking about. These first couple slides are just related to the background, some of my books, and some of the things that I do in terms of presenting as well. So let's go one more slide forward, Martin. And this is the one I want to start with. So this is an article I wrote many years ago for CNN Style magazine. I live in Slovenia, though I'm an American, and so everything I encounter is a potentially interesting story because it's a little bit exotic and probably hasn't been written about in English yet. And this gentleman who looks Indiana Jones-ish is Ivan Šprajc, who is a Slovenian archaeologist who has single-handedly discovered more than 80 ancient lost Mayan cities in Mexico. And this article is about him, but it's also about the bigger question: how, in the age of digital mapping and GPSs, are there so many lost cities that we are still discovering? But to open it, it's good to have a cinematic narrative hook. And I'm always using this when I talk with Reedsy clients about opening lines, opening paragraphs, opening pages of writing samples and of book proposals. You get one chance to make a first impression. Nobody wants to be shot at with literary fireworks. That's really hit or miss. You don't want to use an overabundance of adjectives, and you don't want to overwrite. What editors are looking for and what readers are looking for are something that's clean and with a touch of style without trying too hard. And that's always a tough balance to strike. But you can do worse damage with overwriting or being heavy-handed, or really not controlling the reader in a pleasant way. Controlling someone sounds like it could be negative, and of course it could be. But we as writers are manipulators, benevolent manipulators. So we are manipulating what the reader is anticipating, thinking, sometimes even feeling, in a way that is pulling the reader through a story and hopefully is going to be a pleasurable experience overall. And so we need to be aware of that and think proactively to take advantage of it. So this is by way of introduction. Let me just read you the opening it's a little more than a paragraph, but the opening hook of this article. And then I want to break down a little bit about what I did. And then we're going to pull back and talk about how other writers write cinematically, sometimes in an age before the screen era, and how now in the screen era, we can quite literally think about writing in terms of a series of film scenes. If we imagine a film made of our book, but directly, not inspired by, but scene by scene, and also about storyboarding, which is a term you would usually use for making a film, but we can also do it for our lessons here in writing. So, a sweat-smothered man in a wide-brimmed hat, knee-high leather boots, and a khaki uniform machetes his way through lush jungle foliage. As thick tangles of vine fall beneath his blade, he pushes into a clearing, then suddenly staggers back. The fanged mouth of a primordial stone beast gapes toward him. Before him rise the crumbled ruins of an enormous portal of rock, black with age, but with a colossal grandeur not yet lost. A fine example of what archaeologists call a zoomorphic portal, or more popularly, a monster mouth gate. What was once the gateway to an ancient Mayan city, built circa 700 AD and mysteriously abandoned 4 centuries later, stands before him. He has found the lost city of Lagunita. So just to go line by line and break down what I was trying to do here. Now, if you're writing long enough, you're not necessarily proactively thinking, what am I trying to do here? It comes at a subconscious level as you're constructing your story and writing. But I use this as a teaching tool because it can be helpful to deconstruct what we're seeing. So one thing in the opening line, we're trying to have a sense of seeing a person engaged in an action in a specific time and place that's relevant to the overall story we're reading. Now that sounds like a mouthful. I'm going to say it one more time because it is relevant. It is the default way to open good nonfiction essays, chapters of nonfiction books, and fiction as well. It works on all of the above. So we want to see a person engaged in an action. So that means they're not just sitting there, they're not spacing out, they're actually doing something proactive in a specific time and place. And what they're doing should be relevant to the overall story. So this is about an archaeologist who finds ancient Mayan cities. So what do we see him doing? We see him machete his way through jungle foliage. Now, this is me being just a little bit artsy. To machete is not technically a verb, but we can make a verb out of anything we like. And avoiding verbs like to go and to be is something that my second year of high school English teacher, Mr. Yankis, told us we get minus points if we use to be or to have or to go in anything we write for him. So we had to avoid those. So sometimes you can invent a verb, and that's can help because the invention of the verb tells you both what's in his hand and what he's doing with it, and it's in place of the word moving or walking or pushing. So it takes a lot on in a single word. And it also, as writing should, at times pleasantly surprise the reader with how truthful the phrasing is, but they never thought of it that way. So I'm not going to toot my own horn about this, but the idea that somebody moving through thick jungle, that they're macheting their way, is not a cliched way to describe it, and it's not a simplified way to describe it, which would just be walking through the jungle, chopping things with his machete. So if you can come up with this turn of phrase, then a single word can actually provide a lot of meaning and can be a powerful tool. But if you think about it, imagine what you imagined when I read this to you. So we have a sweat-smothered man in a wide-brimmed hat, and you can imagine the camera relatively close up, close enough to see him covered in sweat. And maybe we can see the slashing through the jungle. And then we turn, the next line is effectively another shot if we're cinematizing this in our imagination. As thick tangles of vine fall beneath his blade, he pushes into a clearing, then suddenly staggers back. Effectively, the lens, the imaginary camera, is focused on him. We see his surprised reaction, but we don't yet know what he's surprised by. I save that for the next line. Imagine the next line. We then cut away and we see what he sees. The fanged mouth of a primordial stone beast gapes towards him. Then we step aside for a moment and we get information or exposition. And that's okay because I've already hooked you with action and hopefully a bit of a cinematic pizzazz. And you're going to be patient with me when I tell you the definition of a zoomorphic portal, which, if you remember anything today, then you should hopefully remember this super new vocabulary word, totally useless, but you can impress all your friends the next time you drop zoomorphic portal into a conversation. So we get a little of information in. And then we get a little bit more about what the place was without revealing too much, because good writing introduces tension by asking a question, either overtly or implied, and then delaying the resolution of the tension. You see, I was just playing with you a little bit where I was speaking slowly intentionally to try to draw out the tension, and you're saying, what's Noah going to say? Get on with it already is what you might have been saying. But the idea is you can play with the anticipation of the reader, or the audience in this case, and make them wait a little bit longer, which increases the sense of tension and pulls them in closer with you. So we have that what was once the gateway to an ancient Mayan city, built circa 700 AD and mysteriously abandoned, stands before him. And another important thing, I've inserted a question in your mind. I said it's mysteriously abandoned in 700, no, abandoned 4 centuries later. And I've implanted the question without asking it overtly, why was it abandoned? But I haven't told you yet. The implication, our deal, is that I'll tell you if you keep on reading. But I've intentionally not given it away. I've inserted the tension, but I won't release it until later on in the article. And so this is how one paragraph of a magazine article can have this idea of cinematizing. And Martin, let's go to the next slide and talk a bit about how, from the writer's perspective, we could approach this. So the term storyboarding, you're probably familiar with in film and television. It effectively looks like a comic book where you have a single image of roughly what we will see in each shot. So might have seen storyboards in a documentary of the shower scene in Psycho, and it's a series of shots. And before they're filmed, directors of photography sitting with the directors of the film and the screenwriter will often have artists, these days it's probably computer programs, drafting what they're seeing through the camera lens for each thing that needs to be shown in the story, whether it's a piece of dialogue. It could be an entire scene that's a single shot, or it could be a cutaway to see someone's reaction. Now, we do that when we have a visual medium like film, but what I'm encouraging you to consider is storyboarding for scenes in whatever it is you're writing. What you're effectively doing is drawing the reader's quote unquote view of your scene. And with that in mind, you could imagine writing about what we're doing now from my perspective, looking at my computer screen, seeing that at the moment there's 656 people watching me, and I'm hoping I don't make a mistake while I frantically teach you. 661, okay, we already lost a few. so that's one option. The other option is you could write the scene from your perspective. Who is this guy? Why is he in Slovenia? Why has he got a funny hairdo? And what are you learning or not learning from him? You could also do it from Martin's perspective. Poor Martin has listened to dozens of Reedsy Live talks. He could probably give all of them himself. What's his view? So each one is a different perspective of the scene now, and you can choose which ones you want to write in your story. And you can also try writing from different perspectives. So I had an editor come back to me with a scene I wrote, and I'd written a scene where somebody comes home to his apartment, And he sees that the apartment is broken into, the door is partly open, and he doesn't know if the intruder is still inside. And I wrote the scene from his perspective. And my editor said, Noah, can you write this from a different angle? And so I tried writing it from the perspective of the intruder who was standing in the shadows behind the person who was looking at his apartment door broken into. And it was more effective that way. In fact, it was maximally effective that I showed the point of view of the person coming home to their apartment, seeing the door broken open. And then I cut away to the intruder who was actually behind the protagonist, lurking in the shadows. And the idea of speaking in terms of angles and shots, I think, is a powerful one. Now, you can do this within any one scene. Maybe you have a dialogue taking place in a cafe, and you have one piece of dialogue is said from the perspective of character A, and character B reacts to it in their thoughts and then speaks back to character A. And then maybe there's a C character who's watching the scene unfold from sitting somewhere else in the cafe. And you can play around with it, see which one works best for whatever it is you want to achieve. There may be a scene where you don't want to reveal who is the focal point of the scene. Maybe someone is moving through a country house at night just after someone was murdered there, and we don't want to reveal who it is. In that case, we might show it from someone else's perspective who only sees the back or the shadow of the person creeping around. Okay, next slide. So this is a fun part. I researched for some famous literary examples of people doing things that, in my analysis, are cinematic shots. But this is before anyone would think in those terms, because these are mostly classic historical novels written before the screen era. But let me just read them to you. This is the only longer one. Most are one sentence long, and talk very briefly about what sort of shot it is. And what I'm hoping this will do is encourage you to have another way of thinking about things that you read. So thinking in terms of, if this were a film shot, what sort of shot would it be? And am I, in fact, as Noah suggests, when I read something, am I translating it into a film in my head? People tend to do this, not everyone, not always, but they tend to do it when we're reading anything that has action with characters we follow, as long as it's not theoretical. So this is a type of shot. This is perhaps one of the most famous openings in literary history from Dickens's Bleak House. London, Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth. And it would not be wonderful to meet a megaloceros 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. Smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft, black drizzle with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes. Gone into mourning, one might imagine, for the death of the sun. Dogs undistinguishable in mire, horses scarcely better, splashed to their very blinkers. Foot passengers jostling one another's umbrellas in a general infection of ill temper, and losing their foothold at street corners, where tens of thousands of other foot passengers have been slipping and sliding since the day broke, if this day ever broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud, sticking at those points tenaciously to the pavement and accumulating at compound interest. Man, did this guy know how to write. And man, is it obvious he got paid by the word. This is a great opening. And what does it do? Well, it has the effect of a wide establishing shot that then zooms in and out and jumps around like some sort of miniature drone that is flying above London and through it, and zooming in on a flake of soot like a snowflake, and zooming in on the mud on people's feet, and zipping in and out past horses and dogs and in the black drizzle, and imagining this dinosaur on Holborn Hill. All of it is this like traveling fairy's eye view. If you imagine a drone long before drones were ever thought of, this is the sort of opening shot that today would probably have to be made with CGI, computer generated images, because it would be too complicated to actually film. So I think this is a great opening that is cinematic in its expansiveness. Um, Back when he was writing, some people might call this a God's eye view. That's sometimes used to describe paintings that show a large macroscopic view as well as zoomed in details. I use this term when I teach about the Ghent altarpiece, which I have a whole book about, which is arguably the most influential painting ever made. It has a scene in it with over 100 figures, but it also has light reflecting in a horse's eye. And that term, a God's eye view, is evocative in that it's the sense that you can see everything macroscopically or microscopically at once if you want to. Okay, next slide. So here we have some much shorter examples, obviously, but let's just hammer through a bunch of them. From The Great Gatsby. This is a valley of ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, and over it all broods the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. So this shot type, the way I describe it, is a slow zoom into a mysterious character, ending with a sort of medium close-up. We have to be able to suddenly see this guy's eyes, and then we're introduced to him. So you could imagine the camera slowly zooming into a figure who we only later meet. Then Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. Jewel and I come up from the field following the path in single file. Although I am 15 feet ahead of him, anyone watching us from the cotton house can see Jewel's frayed and broken straw hat a full head above my own. So this is like a tracking shot or a bird's eye view, because we can see two figures, we're cinematizing it in our minds, walking in single file. And we have to be able to see that one person is 15 feet ahead of the other. But Faulkner says anyone watching us from the cotton house, which we imagine is from a distance and above, because all they see is Jewel's frayed and broken straw hat. So we can imagine the perspective looking down on them, and the difference in height, which is implied without stating overtly. And then we can imagine a sort of close up on the broken hat, straw hat. Then Toni Morrison, Beloved. 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did the children. This is a great, effectively haunted house introduction. And it feels like a close-up of the house itself that's sort of personifying the house, giving the inanimate object a personality and a sense of evil to it. And I could imagine zooming in through a window and through rooms of the house if I were to cinematize it. And then Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. This is one of the great opening lines. And it's got a lot going on here, but in a single sentence, it accomplishes a lot of heavy lifting. We're introduced to this character. We're introduced to the fact that he's going to be at least shot or nearly shot. We are introduced to the fact that the action will take place many years ago, because it starts with many years later. And we understand that he's an interesting character because at this moment where he might be feeling very different things, he remembers a time when his father took him to discover ice, whatever we imagine that to mean. Okay, and the next slide, we have just a few historical examples more. Can you go to the next one? There we yeah, okay. Cormac McCarthy, The Road. Nights dark beyond darkness and the days more gray, each one than what had gone before, like the onset of some cold glaucoma dimming away the world. This is another dude who can he's an amazing writer. And when you're as good as Cormac McCarthy, commas are optional. So you can get a free pass without the grammar police swooping in. But what's the effect of this? It's a stream of consciousness. This is a technique that was really developed in the modernist era of literature, with James Joyce being the most famous example. Finnegan's Wake is an entire novel in stream of consciousness, or the last chapter of Ulysses is Leopold Bloom's wife, Molly, in A Stream of Consciousness. And it lets you drift through the subconscious of a character, their memories and thoughts, and it bounces around it. It's meant to disorient you. But this is a very evocative one that's meant to set the scene. And you can imagine some sort of effect like zooming in on someone's cold, glaucomic eye, or the camera lens itself blurring. But it's very evocative, but it's evocative written in a poetic way, and poetry is usually more difficult to cinematize, and yet it still implies some sort of camera lens dimming or eye dimming, which I think is very powerful. Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway. What a lark, what a plunge, for so it had always seemed to her when, with a little squeak of the hinges, which she could hear now, she had burst open the French windows and plunged at Burton into the open air. So this I imagine as what I call a street level dolly shot. So a dolly shot is, on tracks. It looks like a little train, so it moves smoothly. These days they have, special cameras that they don't need the track to make it move smoothly. Or if you're doing it really inexpensively, as has happened on some films I've been involved with, you put your cameraman in a wheelchair and push them very slowly, and it's like a tracking shot for much less money. But you have this idea of the French windows bursting open and the view of it from street level and the point of view of the camera looking up. Now, Herman Melville, Moby Dick, of course, long before we had cinema, but whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This to me is, starting on a grizzled looking sailor and panning sideways to look at a wide ocean vista. Or if we want to withhold the reveal of what the sailor in question looks like, it starts with a shot of a choppy ocean off the coast of New Bedford, Massachusetts. Last couple, Leo Tolstoy, Anna Karenina, one of the most famous opening lines of any. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. This, to me, is, on the one hand, theoretical because it's not yet talking about a specific family, but the story will be about a specific family, a specific unhappy family. And I could imagine a sort of Wes Anderson style, very stylized series of snapshots of quirky looking individuals or families, or a slow pan over the family in question with close ups of their face where we're reading it for details, to understand, to get to know them through their face. And then one more classic that's more elaborate. And this is, of course, written in the cinema age. And I think it uses that to her advantage. This is Annie Proulx, The Shipping News. The old house, gray as weathered wood, stood on its timbers like a ship on a ways. They began to move it one cold day in March. Men in parkas and wool hats, the breath smoking out of their mouths, jacked it up and slid logs beneath. They wrapped it in chains and fastened it to the back of a Dodge Power wagon. The driver eased forward, the chains tightened, the house creaked like an old ship. With a great sliding and moaning, it began to move. Inch by inch, then foot by foot, they pulled the house across the hard-packed snow and glare ice of the harbor. An old man on shore watched, nodding. "That's the way we done it," he said. "You can move anything in winter." This is powerfully, and I think intentionally, at least at a subconscious level, a series of powerful shots. So the house, gray as weathered wood, stood on its timbers like a ship on the waves. This is the most iconic image from this book, which is towing an entire house across a sea of ice to move it. And we see the house panning over the weathered wood. And they began to move it one day in March. We can see a close-up of the breath smoking out of their mouths. We can see the action of them jacking it up and putting the logs beneath and pulling it. The driver eased forward. We see the driver nervously pushing the car into gear. The chains tightened. We cut away to the chains themselves. The house creaks like an old ship, and then it begins to slide. And then we move from the perspective to the perspective of the view of the old man on shore. And then we see his hopefully very grizzled face chomping on a corncob pipe or whatever he's doing. That's the way we done it. I love this. Okay, next slide. Now, for the final part of today's talk, what I've done is conceive of a scene and write the exact same scene from a number of perspectives, angles, or shots, however you want to think about it. And the idea is when you are planning a scene, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, the only difference is did it really happen or are you making it up? They can be just as cinematic, just as engagingly written in nonfiction as fiction. You can pick and choose how you want to show it. You can vary it for variety's sake, or you can be selective because there's a reason to make it happen as such. So, the basic scene, a man is being chased by police across St. Peter's Square in Rome. So, let's just look at the different ways that I did it. What I'm doing specifically is not important. The idea I want to convey to you is you can think about in your own writing how you divide your scenes or moments into quote unquote shots, with the understanding that doing so can be to your advantage because your reader is already at a subconscious level likely wanting to translate what they're reading into a film in their minds. And of course, from a purely logistical standpoint, it's easier for unimaginative film producers to option a book that they can easily imagine as a movie, more so than, for example, a very poetic book that doesn't naturally lend itself to something that could be filmed easily. So there is that practical application as well. Okay, so let's go one at a time as we read through these, and none of them are long, but from high above the colonnade, a lone figure darts through the elliptical geometry of St. Peter's Square, cutting diagonally across the cobblestones. Four dark-clad officers fan out behind him like the tail of a comet. Tourists clatter and freeze, cameras raised, while a flock of pigeons erupts upward in a spiraling burst, momentarily obscuring the chase from view. Bernini's perfect symmetry breaks into chaos. Okay, this is also an example of me overwriting a little bit, but that's okay for our purposes. Of course, this is an aerial or a drone shot. It's an overhead wide establishing shot. You've seen I broke it down in the text beneath. And we're effectively getting a bird's eye view over the full oval of St. Peter's Square, where the fugitive is a small figure, but we're seeing what's happening from above. And we have this effect of the pigeons being disturbed and shooting upwards towards us, towards the camera. Next one. A wide shot. So this is the view from a tourist in the square looking at the scene. From the shade of the security queue, a tourist watches as a figure bursts from the crowd, sprinting past the obelisk. Four uniformed policemen thunder behind, weaving through startled families. The sound of shouts, the sudden flutter of wings, and the flash of motion, a chaos that lasts seconds before disappearing beyond the fountain's edge. So this is from the perspective of a bystander. It's a static, wide shot. So the shot itself isn't moving, and we see a lot of people in one shot. So it's the view from a tourist waiting in line. Okay, next one. A profile shot or side tracking. That's like a dolly shot that moves sideways alongside the movement of the actors. Stage left to right, the fugitive bolts past the frame, boots slapping stone, arms pumping. One beat later, four policemen follow in synchronized urgency, breathing hard, radios bouncing at their belts. Behind them, pigeons scatter into the air in a gray-white explosion, wings beating in rhythm with the footsteps. The dome of St. Peter's looms in the background, still and monumental. So medium lateral tracking shot, or called a side profile. And we see first the fugitive zip from left to right across the screen. And then we see the police zip from left to right across the screen without the camera changing positions. And you can really get a sense of that when you read the prose. If we cover up the screen and we only have the prose and we remove this explanation of what sort of shot it is that I've added for you, you can imagine, you'd automatically picture it the way it would be filmed without me having to tell you to do so. Next one. POV, which stands for point of view of the fugitive. So in front of the chase. Sweat blurs the vision, statues blur past. You glance over your shoulder, four policemen closing the distance, faces set, shouting in Italian. Tourists gape, some try to move aside. A stroller wheels into your path, you hurdle it. Pigeons explode upward from underfoot. The dome is ahead, but there's no time to look. So this is trying a couple of different things. It is present tense. As soon as it's present tense, everything feels more immediate. Past tense is the default. It's perfectly fine. But if you want immediacy, present tense is a good way to go. It's also second person narrative, which is very unusual. It doesn't really work well over the course of a whole book, if I'm honest. A whole book in the second person, you, can be a bit much. It can get tedious. But in short bursts, it's effective because what it does, each time you read the word you, subconsciously we think, me? Are you talking to me? And then we say, it's just a book. Me? You're talking to me? Oh, it's just the book. But that idea that I'm talking literally to you as the reader, that is a subconscious instinct. And so it keeps you on your toes, keeps you gripped, keeps you imagining yourself in the position of the character. And so here we have the point of view. You can imagine a close-up of the fugitive's eyes, a handheld POV of the cameraman running through as if they are the fugitive, spinning backwards, intentionally blurring. If you've seen the films of Paul Greengrass, the Bourne Identity and Bourne Supremacy with Matt Damon, there's a lot of action with handheld cameras that's intentionally just a little bit disorienting, but it's handled so well that you're not actually disoriented. That's the people at the top of their game can do that. Next one is another point of view, but of the policeman. So a policeman, target in sight, blue jeans, black hoodie, hair matted with sweat. He glances back, panic etched across his face. Your boots hammer the stones, your breath sharp in your ears. A pigeon slaps you in the chest mid-flight, feathers in your face, and you push through. The square is a blur of movement, sun, shouts, and shadows. So same technique, just to shake things up. I tried it present tense, second person narrative, so you, but now the you is the policeman, and trying to give it a little more cinematic pizzazz. Is a pigeon really going to smash into the policeman's chest? Probably not, but why not? It gives it a little bit more pizzazz, as I mentioned. And you can imagine a chest level point of view where the pigeon effectively looks like it's bumping into the camera. And just a few more slides. So a real close-up of the face of the fugitive. Now, how do we do a close-up with writing? Well, this is one way. Beads of sweat run in jagged lines down his temple. His eyes flick wildly forward, sideways, back, calculating. Lips parted, breath ragged. A flash of reflection in the cornea. Uniforms behind him. A gasp, muscles tense. Somewhere a pigeon screeches, flapping just above his head. So it forces you to have a close-up that's almost uncomfortably close, because you need to imagine this fugitive close-up to see beads of sweat running in jagged lines down his temple, to see his eyes flicking wildly in different directions. And the thing that I think is most close-up, the most zoomy part of this, is a reflection in the cornea. So you can imagine it's so close that you see the eye of the fugitive, and you see in the light reflected in it the figures in uniform running towards him. Now, it doesn't get any closer than that. And that's really pushing you into the personal space of a character, which can be effective, especially if you're balancing it with, let's say you start with the aerial drone shot that I began with from above. Then we see the point of view of a policeman. Then we see the point of view of the fugitive. Then we see the close-up of the fugitive. And each one of these shots is bringing you closer and closer to the same scene. So don't think in terms of one scene, one shot. You can break up a scene into multiple shots, and it's particularly effective if it's an action sequence. If it's people sitting around having a cigarette, drinking wine, then it's less important to think in terms of shots. But if there's an action sequence, you can imagine, okay, if there's an action sequence in a much older film, it might have been exciting for the time, but it feels a little bit static these days if it's all a medium shot of two people having a sword fight. Today, if we have the cutting edge of action, I mentioned Paul Greengrass and the Bourne films, that's masterfully handled and edited action sequences where you're really moving around a lot and feeling like you're getting lots of angles of the scene, and it feels like added value and more immersive and more exciting. Okay, next one. Three other slightly quirkier options that I didn't bother writing up examples of, but I wrote about how you would imagine it. So a tracking wide shot behind the colonnade around St. Peter's Square. There are all these curved columns, and you can imagine someone moving, looking at the action through the forest of columns and only seeing it as they pass gaps in the columns. That's a long tracking wide shot. You could have a cutaway to the pigeons. If this were like a 1990s kung fu movie, we'd have the pigeons beating their wings in slow motion and then sped up and then slowed down again while somebody like does a leaping kick into the air or whatever they're going to do. And then an oblique angle or tilted horizon, which was called a Dutch angle. Alfred Hitchcock liked these film noir. This is intentionally tilting the camera so it's not at true flat level. And sometimes looking up from a downward angle, which is disorienting. It's used in thrillers and horror movies. Okay, I'm completely on time with one more slide, Martin, and then we can have questions. I love when it all goes according to plan. So in conclusion, what I'd like you to come away with to integrate, if you like the idea of it, of course, is to try storyboarding your book or even articles into scenes. You can even go so far as drawing with sketches or with software what the reader would see if each scene were filmed, considering in terms of positioning and camera angles. You can try rewriting a scene from a different perspective. You can do this as a writing exercise. Or if you have a scene that you feel like something's not quite working, it may be enough to try rewriting it from a different perspective, and all of a sudden it functions. I've certainly done that many times myself. You can even try altering the narrative voice. I wrote a whole novel first in the third person past tense and then rewrote the whole thing in the first person present tense, and it was much better. Next, cinematic writing isn't about an overabundance of detail. That's a sort of Baroque writing style that is hit or miss. Not everyone likes it. So don't think that more adjectives are better than fewer. It's more about memorable set pieces, which often means surreal, surprisingly, highly emotional, over the top, violent, or weird moments. That's, a future talk I might give about how to write memorably. But it seems ridiculous to have to say it, but we want people to remember what we wrote. Otherwise, there's sort of no point in having read it. But in fact, I tend to remember relatively little about books that I've read, aside from striking moments and images. For example, in The Shipping News by Annie Proulx, I don't really remember anything except this vivid scene of people hauling a whole house across a frozen sea, which I thought was so evocative. So those little tips of the iceberg, those touchstones, are what we tend to remember. And we tend to remember things that were maximally surreal, surprising, highly emotional, ridiculously over the top, very violent, or just weird. So when you're writing, hunt for those moments, because that's what people are most likely to remember from your writing. And two more points. Understand that modern readers make a quote unquote movie of what they're reading in their minds as they read. We all tend to do this most of the time, and you can use this to your advantage. You can also, I hope you'll occasionally catch yourself doing this. When I was first introduced to this idea, I thought to ask myself, I don't do that. Surely I don't. And then I wound up catching myself doing it all the time and realizing, okay, this really is a thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a different way of reading than people used to. But let's make it to our advantage if possible. And then finally, if you write cinematically, you might even get a movie deal out of it. So just last concluding slide where you can find me on Reedsy. I'm very happy to answer questions. I hope this was helpful, gave you a few extra tools to test out. As always, take only the things that feel good to you, that make sense to you. But these Reedsy live talks are wonderful because we get all sorts of ideas and you pick and choose what's going to be effective and add to your arsenal when you're writing yourself. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And if there are any questions, I'm here for you.
Yes, do drop your questions in the chat box here on YouTube. I will bring them up. Mark, don't enjoy this presentation. Jackie Burke would love to see a webinar of how to write memorably. Uh, Jackie Burke, of course, is the hero from Elmore Leonard's Rum Punch. I say Barbara Kyoto asks, "This is all amazing. Is there a way to adapt this to a first-person POV?" I guess you sort of got that in those
Yeah.
close ones, but I guess you didn't necessarily touch on any sort of first person. Where would you
Yeah.
say the sort of that close first person limited, where would the camera sort of be in those narratives?
So what I did was a second person present tense POV, but I could have easily done it from another perspective. If you just imagine what you would be thinking where you are running through the scene, and the sweat is dripping across my brow and into my eyes. I can barely see. I turn over my shoulder and I see a blurred vision of four uniformed officers chasing past me, but there's so many pigeons in the way I can barely see them. I turn and make a break for the St. Peter's Basilica. I'm just making this up as I go, but you can do it present tense, past tense, first person, second or third, and it's fun to play with it. If I had, if I were teaching a semester long writing class, I would assign people to rewrite the same scene from many different angles because it's a useful writing exercise, and you do it a few times and then you get the hang of it. But for many people, it sort of doesn't really occur to them to try to rewrite a scene from a different point of view. So if it's something you find useful, I'm delighted to introduce the concept.
Shelley asks, "Isn't there a danger of head hopping with this technique and making the reader giddy?" I suppose a lot
Yes,
of the
there
examples you
is.
brought up were sort of like establishing shots in a sense, and not necessarily.
Yeah, yeah. There is a danger. You have to use it selectively. If you did it throughout a 300-page book, then it would be a bit much. So the whole idea of having shifts in pace, having a variety of feels and scenes and shots will be refreshing. So this works particularly well with action sequences. It doesn't work particularly well, or rather, it's not necessarily to think about it when things are more static with people conversing. Um, we tend to do this anyway. If I describe a scene of two people in a cafe smoking a cigarette and chatting about life, you may imagine shifting from one perspective to another, but you don't really have to describe it because it's less important. And the idea of pulling us forward and immersing us and perhaps intentionally making us feel giddy and disoriented, the way, if anybody hasn't seen Paul Greengrass's Bourne films, it's the very best way that action could possibly be done, if you ask me. And if you see that and think, okay, can I do a literary version of that? Their fight scenes are so jumping all over the place and disorienting, but they give you just enough so you're never confused as to who's where. And it's just masterfully done. But it's hard to do this well. So there's always a danger that it's going to be a little bit too much. So, take little baby steps and be selective as to where you're going to use this and how much you're going to use it.
Yeah, I guess like there is this sort of sense. I think people are saying that they get the sense that we're sort of encouraging moving to this character and showing this character, but it is quite a big move to sort of switch perspectives. Like even like an omniscient narratives, you tend to be anchored
Yeah.
within one particular character, within a scene at least.
You can also use that to your advantage too. You can have the whole story from the point of view of the protagonist, which we tend to do anyway from a narrative perspective because maybe we, the readers, are aware of something the protagonist isn't. Um, but play around with it, see what works for yourself. Don't overdo it and feel like you need to do it in every page too much, but you try it with a scene here and there and see what feels natural and what feels like it's elevating the experience for you, and maybe show it to some reader friends and see if they're into it as well.
Let's see. Hope asks, will this webinar audio, video, and slides be available? You can rewatch it anytime on this particular page on YouTube, so you can go back to see that. The slides will be available on the video itself, so you could scrub it through there. It's not going anywhere, I shouldn't think. Let's see, who else is here? Vanessa, this is right from the beginning, the one based in Croatia. She's actually drinking beer. And
Also
what was the
accepted.
thing?
Nazdravje.
uh, ooh, We have one, Ronald Gordon's, an academic fight about to kick off. As a retired English professor, I can't help thinking that you're encouraging later generations in their addiction to screens. Imagism
Yeah.
has existed long, long before cinematizing.
I feel you, Ronald. Yeah, I was thinking about that too. I feel like if this is a trend that humans are going through, we can push against the current or we can ride it. And I respect either decision. I have a feeling it's easier way forward. The Taoist way forward is to go with the flow and ride it. But if you want to be the rock that is standing for what people used to do in the past, I appreciate that 100%. And honestly, I do think that a lot of writing is written directly in hopes of a movie deal and sacrificing good writing and quality plotting and character development in favor of just pure action. And I don't like that. So I think there's a happy medium to be found.
John Hanson asks how to make inner discourse cinematic. I guess if a narrative
Hmm.
is focuses a lot on the interiority, um, but I suppose by its very nature isn't necessarily visual. But still, like the best
Yeah.
sort of writers do somehow manage to make it's not everyone just purely talking about feelings the entire time and in pure abstracts.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's some of the ways to do it. Stream of consciousness is one way. If you've seen Disney's Inside Out, that's another way you personify all your emotions. It's tricky to do. That's probably the hardest thing to do. And I'm not sure. I think stream of consciousness is probably the one that is most effective.
Fantastic. Loads of compliments here. Claire Balding says, it's a stylistic choice, can't it be both? Well, yeah, I guess. Um, yeah, lots of sort of love for this. Yeah, before we head off, I'm going to do just a tiny bit of housekeeping. Uh, Coming up on Reedsy Live, Reedsy Learning next week, we've got a couple of sort of premium events. These are sort of paid ones. On Monday, we have our Monday Masterclass. Novelist Laurie Goldstein will be back talking about elevating one's prose and revision. I think that's $15. And then we have a short conference on Tuesday on writing swoon-worthy romance. We have a collection of editors and writers, published authors from the world of romance publishing, who will be talking to us over a few presentations. You can find out more about those on reedsy.com/learning/events. Sign up for each of them individually, or we have an annual membership for $249 from what I believe. Before we log off, Noah, well, what do you have going on in your world that people should know about?
Oh, it's very exciting. Too many books coming out, lots of projects, but maybe the thing that's of interest is I do a monthly talk on art for the Smithsonian that anyone can sign up for. And I have a book coming out in December called The Art of Fatherhood, which looks at how fathers have been depicted in the arts through history and what we can learn about being good fathers through that today. So that would be the next one to keep an eye out for.
Fantastic. Could you do me a favor and send me links to those things afterwards? I'll
Of
send
course, I
around
would
an
love
email
to.
tomorrow with the replay here and a few links to those things. Very, very exciting. Noah, I hope to have you back again anytime you want to share something. Writing memorably sounds amazing. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you at home for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next time. Bye.